Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 70 of Fracking Nightmare. Now, breaking news before I get on to the latest in the world of unconventional hydrocarbons. For those of you who aren't spending your lives on the internet, you're probably familiar with this book in one way, shape, or form, Call Me Dave. This is the biography, the unofficial biography, written by Michael Ashcroft and Isabel Oakeshott. And of course, Michael Ashcroft has been a long-term supporter and financier, indeed former party chairman of the Conservative Party and former treasurer. But in Call Me Dave, Michael Ashcroft took to recounting the tale of David Cameron and a pig's head. I'm sure the rest of you are familiar with the story by now. Well, this was a revenge because of failure by David Cameron to keep a promise that he made to Michael Ashcroft in 2010. Well, breaking news. Lord Ashcroft is in intensive care. He's been there apparently for 18 days after suffering from renal failure, septic shock, liver and kidney failure. So I think we can pretty much take it as a given that the attack dogs were unleashed on Michael Ashcroft for that revelation. Get the right teeth in for that revelation. And of course, being a member of the club, having been initiated into the club, one of the rules is that you do not reveal the inner secrets under pain of death. So I think we can pretty much take it as a given that Michael Ashcroft was sought out. And whether or not he was meant to survive, it certainly seems that he's going to get the message. I mean, he pretty much admitted that it was revenge. Whatever the promises that David Cameron made to Michael Ashcroft were obviously not fulfilled. But I can, safely say that Michael Ashcroft is not the most savoury of characters. In fact, I realised the power that Ashcroft wielded over the state of Belize when I was there for 6 months in 2001. And Michael Ashcroft certainly made it his business to run the country like his personal fiefdom. And I also am well aware of the power that he held over the Belizean government by threatening to prevent them from getting their overseas aid from Westminster if they didn't play ball with him regarding his tax liabilities on his Belizean businesses. So he's had his run-ins as well with Belize. This is from a few years ago where Belize even didn't really want him around too much because of the power that he wielded. So more of this will unfold, I'm sure. But what is interesting is when those who refer to themselves as the elite, but of course they are parasites. They are parasites on the backs of humanity. And when they start to turn on each other, then we pretty much know we're coming into the home run. The reality is that an increasing number of people right across the globe are becoming aware of the magnitude of the fraud that these parasites perpetrate on humanity. And it's not going to be too long. I mean, I certainly hope it's in the next few years before the whole edifice comes crashing down, probably in a pile of debt. Well, however it comes crashing down, then of course we have to focus on the rebuilding. But meanwhile, one step at a time. So tonight, we are back focusing on the unconventional gas agenda. And, I have to say that there is a very deep agenda here. And at the very least, it certainly doesn't stop at unconventional gas. And as we've discussed previously, there is my conjecture, as I discussed in the documentary Voices from the Gas Fields, that this is an opportunity to establish the infrastructure for the disposal of toxic nuclear waste, as outlined in the government's own white paper published in July of last year. And I would certainly encourage you to download that document. Simply download Deep Geological Disposal, white paper, PDF, or July 2014, and you can read the document for yourself. In fact, you don't even need to read it. You can look at the graphics and you can see the insidious agenda that this government has for the disposal of toxic nuclear waste. And of course, one of the last votes taken in the last parliament was to remove all local authority participation from the decision-making process of where toxic nuclear waste is buried in this country. So, well, that's it for the opening comments there on the deep geopolitical games and Machiavellian plays that are going on. So let's come back to unconventional gas. Now, we have two front lines right now. The front line of North Yorkshire and the front line of Scotland. And I will be joined shortly by Mel Kelly, an outstanding researcher who's located in Ayrshire on the west coast of Scotland. But before we go to Scotland, let me go back to Yorkshire, because you'll remember from previous editions of Fracking Nightmare that Kevin Hollinrake, and yeah, there you see him on the right-hand side of the picture there. This is Kevin Hollinrake in Pennsylvania on his self-funded fact-finding trip to ascertain whether or not unconventional gas could be extracted safely. Now, while he was there, he met a number of campaigners, not least the wonderful Vera Scroggins, of course, who's been a guest on Fracking Nightmare in the past. And of course, he also met with the industry. Now, immediately upon his return, he was interviewed by the wonderful and extremely tenacious Ruth Hayhurst, who runs the website Drill or Drop. This is an outstanding website, and if you're not familiar with it, I certainly would encourage you to go take a look at Ruth's musings on the unconventional gas industry. And in the interview that she conducted with Kevin Hollinrake, here's what he said. He said, fracking sites should be at least a mile from the nearest home. And obviously, you know, his constituency is right in the front line, because his constituency covers the district of Rydale, which is where Third Energy want to run a 5-stage frack on the well at Kirby Misperton, known as KM8. Kevin Hollinrake, who represents Thirsk and Moulton, told Drill or Drop there is a minimum distance at the moment to put an anaerobic digester away from a house. So why wouldn't you have a minimum distance to a fracking well? He said the separation distance for anaerobic digesters was 400 metres, but he wanted a bigger distance for fracking sites. When asked if he would buy a house 400 metres from a fracking site, he said, that's one reason why I would like it a mile away. Well, this is a very interesting observation by Kevin Hollinrake, because my hunch is that Kevin hadn't done his homework, because had Kevin known the situation in Kirby Misperton, he might have felt it appropriate to temper that remark. So anyway, I'm very grateful that he didn't. Of course, as far as I'm concerned, a mile is nothing like far enough. In fact, they shouldn't exist at all. But here's the situation in Kirby Misperton. So here's the well site. Here's the village of Kirby Misperton. And this here is the entrance to Flamingo Land. Now, this is North Yorkshire's biggest revenue earner from tourism. And it's a year-round attraction, and it's a zoo, it's a breeding place for rare species, and of course it's an Alton Towers style amusement park. Now, what is interesting is that pretty much the entire village of Kirby Misperton lies well within Kevin Hollinrake's 1 mile exclusion zone. So here we have it here, Yorkshire's biggest tourist attraction. Here's the well, and here's the village. And interestingly, the traffic management plan actually requires the convoys to come down through the village, to come into the well site from the east here. So this is coming from the main A169, coming down through the village, all the way through the village here, which is about half a mile from the well site and then into the well site. So when John Dewar heard that Kevin Hollinrake had made these observations, I think that John Dewar may well have had a word in Kevin Hollinrake's shell-like, because it seems that very shortly afterwards, Kevin Hollinrake was making some rather rapid backtracking over his comment about the mile exclusion zone. Ultimately saying, well, nobody really listened, or words to the effect of, nobody really listens to the MP anyway, which is true. So, Kevin Hollinrake, thank you for acknowledging that you are pretty much irrelevant to the entire debate. And as we've seen elsewhere in the country, whatever the local MP says, nobody really cares anyway. I mean, the classic example of that is Barbara Keeley from Salford, who made it very clear that she would do everything she possibly could to ensure that iGas were never able to drill or frack in her constituency. And, well, it wasn't Barbara Keeley who made sure of that. Of course, it was the protection community working hand in glove with the local residents. So, anyway, we'll come back to Kevin Hollinrake a little while later. Now, on, what would it be, Thursday week ago, still in Yorkshire, and the reason that I was there was to attend the council meeting being held by Ryedale District Council. Now, Ryedale is the district that covers that whole area, including Kirkby Misperton. And I have ringed Cllr John Clark here because Cllr John Clark was absolutely central to the proceedings at this council meeting a little under 2 weeks ago. Now, Cllr Clark had actually submitted a motion to be debated at the council meeting, effectively calling for a 5-year moratorium on unconventional gas exploitation, i.e. fracking, in Ryedale. And this wasn't the first time that he'd submitted a motion of this ilk, but each time the council seemed to find reason not to debate the subject. Well, on this occasion, Cllr Clark immediately took the floor after the council chairman had opened the meeting, demanding that his original motion be reinstated because the motion that was on the agenda had been reworded and was completely unacceptable to him. Well, it became very evident that the council leadership, certainly the chief executive and the council solicitor, were determined that this debate would not occur. They did not want a situation where Ryedale had expressed any opinion or had the opportunity to express any opinion prior to North Yorkshire County Council considering Third Energy's application to frack the well at Kirkby Misperton. Well, had I not actually been there myself, I would never have believed what occurred. Of course, all the media reports are somewhat sanitised, and it looks as though the debate occurred during normal council business, but that is not the case at all. Here's the council leadership there, and the chairman of the council, she with the chain around her neck, sitting next to the chief executive, and then the council solicitor to her right. So Cllr John Clark made numerous attempts to get his motion back on the agenda, and the Machiavellian machinations of the council leadership and the council officers was something else to behold. And after about 45 minutes, it became very clear that the council officers and the council chairman were literally going to do everything they possibly could to prevent the debate from taking place. At which point, another councillor stepped forward to propose that standing orders be suspended. Now, to be fair, he gave notice that he was going to do this, and eventually it became clear that it was the only way in which the debate was going to be heard. So he put forward the proposition that standing orders be suspended, which is effectively the councillors basically removing the council officers and the council chairman from the process, effectively saying, we are going to take control of the agenda from this point forward. Well, subsequently, each councillor had the opportunity. They agreed to abide by the 3-minute rule, where each councillor restricted his submission to 3 minutes. And after another 45 minutes or so, a vote was taken. And that vote was 13-7 in favour of a 5-year moratorium being implemented in the district of Ryedale. Now, ultimately, this is the council, the full council of Ryedale. They make a recommendation which then has to go to the planning committee of Ryedale. And their recommendation is the recommendation which is then subsequently submitted to North Yorkshire County Council's planning committee prior to them considering Third Energy's application. So, of course, the North Yorkshire County Council don't actually have to take much notice necessarily of the Ryedale submission, but it would perhaps be rather foolish not to, seeing as that every single parish council in Ryedale that has debated this issue has elected to reject fracking in their area, despite the fact that the parish council clerk, a lady by the name of Sally Brown, clearly operating under the direction of the Ryedale officers, has endeavoured to restrict debate even at the parish council level, even going as far as to omitting to minute any discussion on fracking at the parish council level. So here we've got clear prima facie evidence that Westminster is using its local communities officers, like Greg Clark, I think is the minister there, to try to shut down the democratic process around the country. So intent are they in pushing this agenda forward. So once the vote was taken, in fact, I gather that one of the Tory councillors actually voted in favour of the 5-year moratorium, and realising his mistake, fell ill and had to be rushed to hospital. Of course, we hope he's well and thank him for his contribution to the vote. Of course, it would have still passed 12-8 had he voted differently. So it's all to play for here. Now, Yorkshire County Council are expected to hear the Third Energy application sometime in the next month or so. And when they do so, one hopes that they will hold an open floor hearing. In other words, where all interested parties, all stakeholders have the opportunity to present their case. Because this is far too important to be limited to a 4, 5 or 6 minute presentation by one of the proposers and one of the anti-fracking community. So, all to play for in North Yorkshire. So after that eventful evening, then I drove up to Scotland to meet up with a lady who has earned my utmost respect since I've got to know her over the last few weeks, and that's Mel Kelly. And Mel, you're back with us for the second time tonight.
Yes, good evening, Ian.
Good evening, and thanks for staying with us. So, I mean, what I've just described in North Yorkshire is actually almost nothing compared to the shenanigans that took place at the Tory party conference last week.
I think you watch any politicians at any conference, and when it comes to fracking and unconventional gas, whether it's at council level, whether it's at Scottish Government level, whether it's at Westminster level, basically what you've got is leaders and executives, basically people that are all in the same union. Workers aren't allowed to be in a union, ordinary people aren't, but what you've got is a corrupt club in Britain where they are all in it together, stretching right across every country where people are put in place to make sure that they get their own way and nobody else is allowed to have any say whatsoever.
And I think we saw at the start of the show what happens if one of the club actually turns on the pack, as it were, and then the pack unleash their attack dogs on the dissenter.
Yeah, I mean, if you've signed up to take 30 pieces of silver, which is a very comfortable life for you for the rest of your life, and guaranteed work for you and your partners and whatever, then obviously you've got to abide by their rules. But the difference is their rules, they make the rules for everybody, but they're all above the rules.
And all you have to do is sell your soul, basically.
Yeah, I mean, 30 pieces of silver, it comes in many guises. And there's a hell of a lot of people walking about right now with 30 pieces of silver jingling in their pockets.
Now, on the day that I was actually at the Rydale Council meeting, the Scottish government actually announced that it was going to extend the moratorium to include underground coal gasification. So I won't say there was much celebration, but there was thought that this was probably done to take the wind out of the sails of the forthcoming Hands Across the Forth event on the following Sunday. But then something else happened less than 24 hours later.
Yes, we're very fortunate that the Herald newspaper in Scotland gave us the full extent of the announcement. And basically what Nicola gave in one hand, she absolutely smashed in the other, because what they actually did was said, okay, we'll include UCG in the moratorium, but guess what? UCG and fracking exploration stage can now go ahead. Of course, we all know a moratorium is meant to mean all activities are suspended. So basically what Cameron's doing is saying everybody can go and do their exploration drilling. Nicola's just announced the same thing in the same breath. She tried to claim she'd put UCG in the moratorium when exploration drilling is test drilling. But she went one further and she said, but don't worry people, I will appoint Campbell Gemmell to oversee this test drilling that isn't test drilling the same as England. No, this is moratorium that we've got. So, but this magic difference that is no difference at all. She says, don't worry, Campbell Gemmell used to be the head of SEPA. Now, Campbell Gemmell was the head of SEPA. Campbell Gemmell covered up problems with test drilling on Buccleuch's estate. And it just so happens Buccleuch is a big shareholder in UCG, which he's meant to oversee too. And there was 4 test drills done, and there was problems with the cement casings, which would contaminate the water. And as Campbell Gemmell, as head of SEPA, decided, I'm not going to tell anybody, I'm not going to tell the local council, I'll just keep that quiet.
Now let's just reflect on where that occurred, because my understanding is that occurred down at Canonby.
Yes, on Buccleuch's estate.
On Buccleuch's estate. Now this is originally a Dart Energy license, and of course Dart Energy is now in the ownership of iGas, and of course INEOS have taken a significant stake in iGas, particularly their operations in Scotland. So this we've got the same players, and of course we've also got the underground coal gasification here. And I think, if my memory serves me correctly, this one is 5 quarters. That's in the Solway Firth there. I think that's 5 quarters, and of course that's the company that tried to silence you by threatening you with a gagging order. Then down the not too far away. Okay, it's across the border in England, but just off the coast of Cumbria here, we have the 2 northern licenses. I think are Clough. And then I think we have another 5 quarters license here. And then this one is Riverside. So we've got, in this area, we've not only got the coal bed methane, but we've also potentially got a whole bunch of underground coal gasification. Now, the coal bed methane is what we're talking about on the estates here. And looking at the reports, it looks to me, it wasn't just a failure of the cement. It looks like there was 300 feet of casing where the cement was, well, basically had no integrity whatsoever.
Yeah. And Campbell Gemmell decided, as head of SEPA, who are the people that are meant to regulate this, that he'll just not tell the council. And that meant, of course, that they had no idea. So when it came to planning consent, how can they make planning decisions based on SEPA covering up what's going on? And
Mel, earlier this evening in Humanity versus Insanity, we were talking about the culture of demoralisation, the culture of mistrust. And I stumbled across this, and this is from the Sunday Herald on the 23rd of August 2009. And it says, senior managers of the Scottish Government's Green Watchdog are not trusted by nearly half their staff, according to an internal survey leaked to the Sunday Herald. The agency bosses are strongly criticised for lacking effective leadership, poor communication, and failing to manage change. Most staff say that their jobs are hindered by unnecessary bureaucracy. And I think that this is about the time that Campbell Gemmell actually departed SEPA.
Yeah, his staff had no faith in him. Obviously, the people have no faith in him because when there was problems with test drilling in Buccleuch's estate, this is the man that covered it up. And now Nicola appoints the same man to oversee UCG test drilling, which is the exploration phase, when Buccleuch is actually involved and got UCG licences in Scotland too. Now, after he left SEPA, he gets a job in Australia to be head of the Environmental Protection Area Agency, and people in Australia are also complaining about him because they're having major problems with low-level noise and wind farms, and they're basically saying, as far as they were concerned, he was looking after commercial interests. People are having to leave their homes. At least 5 homes have been abandoned, and this man had an offer of free help from the best acoustic people in the world in America. He turned that down. Seemingly the monitoring stuff's getting put under gum trees to try and muffle any possible monitoring. And so is covered up test drilling problems in Scotland. The staff don't have faith in him. The people in Australia don't have faith in him. So Nicola appoints him to be the head of to oversee test drilling in Scotland. It's not test drilling, it's the exploration phase, the exact same as in England.
Exactly. And by the way, when he was in Australia, he blamed his failings on the South Australian government. He said, recently departed Environmental Protection Authority Chief Campbell Gemmell says the task of fixing South Australia's industrial contamination was made more difficult by cultural problems, including a lack of funds and political support. So this is how these guys play this. Of course, they do the government's bidding, because that's why they're appointed. And eventually, of course, they reach a point where they can't cover it up anymore. So then they have to leave. So this is what he is quoted as saying. But of course, by this time, he's gone. So it's a question of doing this, isn't it? And I'm sure he was appointed, very carefully, just like Dave Hill, who I was referring to in Humanity versus Insanity. They're appointed because they're a safe pair of hands, because they've got the skills and the total lack of integrity that is necessary to fulfil these roles.
And in Scotland, we call it a brass neck. They'll look at anybody in the eye. They will do anything, and they have a total brass neck. They'll take money and they'll claim they're experts. Well, they're certainly expert looking after number one. But when you're head of SEPA and you're meant to be responsible for the safety of our water, and you cover up test drilling problems that it's said which can cause problems and contaminate groundwater. We're talking about cancer-causing chemicals. It's unbelievable Why would Nicola choose someone like that to oversee the start of test drilling in Scotland? Someone that's already let Scotland down as head of SEPA and had to admit that his regulations obviously weren't adequate when he was in charge, when his staff don't have faith in him. There's only one reason for appointing a man that's already covered up test drilling, and that's if you want problems with the fracking test drilling and the UCG test drilling to once again be covered up. Because if somebody's done that before and you're aware of it and you appoint them to do the same thing, then you're complicit in attempting to cover up. And it is no different to Theresa May appointing people with vested interest to the child sex abuse inquiries. And both of those people were forced out. And even the third person she appointed, actually, that's sitting there now, when you look online, you find reports saying that she's already accused of covering up for a judge.
Well, she hasn't actually conducted any interviews yet since being appointed to the role. So she's clearly in no hurry to actually start this investigation, is she?
Yeah, well, that's because they want everybody to try and forget about the two people with vested interests that Theresa May tried to appoint that the people said you're not on. So let's bring in somebody from Australia, from New Zealand, but actually she was married to Scottish landed gentry. They divorced. She goes to New Zealand, but she's a Queen's Counsel. Let's remember, that's why Campbell Gemmell went to Australia. The old empire and the old boy network still
Well, actually,
works.
there was something else that you picked up about Campbell Gemmell's partner. I mean, earlier tonight we were talking about the SNP control mechanism of Nicola and her husband. And I mean, I wonder in Scotland how many people are actually aware that Nicola Sturgeon's husband is the chief executive of the SNP. Maybe everybody, I don't know. But I mean, certainly, in the straw poll that I did in England today, nobody was aware of that. It was a pretty well-kept secret, but I'm sure I'm going to be told that everybody knew it in Scotland.
Well, it's not made obvious, but people in the SNP would know it, but a lot of people don't. But when you're in a certain club in Britain, then it's not just you that does very nicely out it. Your partners do very nicely out it. So when Campbell Gemmell went to Australia, people were up in arms because his partner, Avril Gold, gets lucrative consultancy work, makes about 137,000 for hardly time.
For 11 weeks work, I think it was. 11 weeks, yeah.
$137,500, and yet the job wasn't advertised. Isn't that amazing that someone comes from Scotland and they magically get a job in the government, a consultancy contract, without the job even being advertised? I mean, who would even know she was there?
Yeah.
I mean, her partner was there to work for the government.
Well, and now she gets a pretty lucrative position with Stirling Council, and apparently survives the culling. I mean, the culling that is going on all around to cut public services so they can privatise. And Avril survives that again and gets a very senior position with Stirling Council.
Yeah, I mean, you see it with the SNP in Scotland as well. I mean, they asked Lady Susan Rice to be their economic advisor, and she's made a lady, and of course she's a banker, so she's part of the club. And then you had the SNP saying, don't just be our economic advisor. How would you like another job? Why don't I make you the new chairman of Scottish Water? How'd you like that? And then you have a lady called Moya Ali. I mean, she works for David Cameron, and she works for England's Lord Chancellor in various posts. And then the SNP said, well, can we give you lots of jobs? So they appointed her to the Scottish Police Authority quango. They appointed her to the Education quango. They appointed her to the Ambulance quango. She's on various justice bodies, and she even actually had the cheek to complain she didn't have enough power. But nobody's elected these people. These are just jobs for the boys. And the old boy network and in Britain is alive and kicking, and Scotland is a massive part of that. And just because these people wrap themselves in a Scotland flag and pretend that they are somehow care about the poor and the ordinary people of Scotland, when you look at what they do instead of listening to what they say, then you find out that they're just as new SNP as Blair was New Labour and Clegg was New Liberal. There's a breed of people since Thatcher who are all in it together, and they consistently pick the exact same people all the time. And it doesn't matter how incompetent they are. They're not picked for competency. They are picked for the fact that they have signed up to join a club. And let's face it, by choosing Campbell Gemmell, I'm quite sure with the Duke of Buccleuch being an investor in UCG, that he'll be shaking Nicola's hand at the Privy Council and saying, thanks very much, Nicola, because that could come in useful if there's problems with UCG drilling. I'm sure I can rely on Campbell, old boy.
Right, exactly. And of course, Campbell is buddy-buddy with Professor Paul Younger too.
Oh yes, it's not just the Duke of Buccleuch that'll be happy about this appointment. I mean, you have Campbell Gemmell already tweeting how another UCG director is a wonderful guy, and I had interesting conversations with him.
Oh, I think I've got this the tweet here. Here we go. Great chat with Professor Paul Younger, engineering at Glasgow, about water, energy, regulation and science. A canny lad who can. Now, you'll have to translate that last sentence for me. A canny lad who can. And what does that mean, Mel?
Smart the right way, got the right connections, who can get to do what he wants because he's got the right connections. Well, I'm here to tell you that Scotland are a canny race, and don't tell us that we cannot stop you, because we will.
Well, I have to say that the people that I have met in my trips to Scotland over the past few months, particularly, well, probably, I did 3 Fractured Future presentations in Scotland 2 years ago. And I've been to Scotland, I think, about half a dozen times since. And the people that I meet are extremely aware. And the people that I talk to who are, openly supporters of the SNP are becoming very disillusioned with the leadership. Now, I admit that I'm only speaking to a relatively small cross-section, but nonetheless, it is a cross-section. So would you say that that's a reasonable analysis of the current status?
I mean, it's not just the duplicity over fracking and UCG. I mean, the motion that was put forward was the members wanted fracking banned, and the leadership changed the motion to say that the motion is now going to be you're only allowed to vote on that you agree with our moratorium. But they didn't agree, because at the end of the day, that's why so many voted against it, was because they had already made it plain that there is no moratorium. That's just a word that Nicola very clever uses for headlines, and she relies on the fact that people read a headline and don't read the story. So that people in Scotland are duped into thinking that there's a moratorium. But the membership knew the moratorium was worthless. That's why they put forward a motion. They want a banning fracking. And just like in Rydale, the leadership do everything in their power to make sure there was no vote. So yeah, they've got the power to do that, but the people in Scotland's got the power to walk away. And there are many members, and not just the new members. I'm talking about elected members that have been SNP members for years and been elected for years, that are disgusted, and not just over the fracking. We've got the water situation. Now, as I said to you before, the SNP have put water restrictions on the entire Scottish economy, including whisky and farmers and animals in Edinburgh Zoo. Every business.
Except
fracking. No, except mining. Now, what is mining? Mining is fracking, UCG and CBM. as well as conventional mining. So I thought I'll write to my MSP. She's a minister in the government, and I'll say to her, like, can you clarify this? You've said mining is exempt from water restrictions, and can you confirm that means fracking's exempt, UCG's exempt, coal bed methane's exempt? Can you confirm gold mining's exempt? 2 weeks ago, the reply, she wrote to me and said, "Oh, I can't answer that. I'll need to get the government to do it." So she passes it to the government. She passes it to Cllr. The answer I get back is, I can't give you an answer to that question. A simple question, is fracking mining? Is UCG mining? I cannot answer that question. We cannot give you that legal advice. I never asked for legal advice. Now, it's their bill, and they specifically put mining to be exempt from water exceptions because, of course, the frackers want lots and lots of water. So let's sacrifice the entire Scottish economy's water needs on the altar of unconventional gas needs for the SNP and their fracker friends.
So what Scotland has, effectively, is the Sturgeon Loophole. I mean, so I think most people watching this programme are familiar with the Halliburton loophole, which effectively gives the unconventional gas industry in the US the equivalent of diplomatic immunity, basically. And now, in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon has effectively recreated much of the Halliburton loophole for the Scottish unconventional gas industry.
Yep, and basically, because you asked the question, then the official government response in writing is fracking mining? We cannot give you that legal advice.
So the answer basically is yes.
Yes, but we don't want to admit that, because then the Scottish people will see what total ratbags we really are. So how can we get round actually? Now, when you have INEOS stating in all their brochures and their glossy, we are establishing a fracking mining industry in Scotland. The world knows fracking is considered mining. The world knows UCG is considered mining. But the Scottish government made a point of making it exempt. Now, why would you make something exempt if you don't know what it means? So now they want to try and claim, because the people understand what it means and say, wait a minute, what do you think you're doing? They go, oh, we don't know what mining means. I mean, how are we meant to know? Well, you put it in the law. So what are you doing putting mining in as an exemption if you're claiming you don't bloody know what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. Mel, look,
Unbelievable.
we're going to take a short break. I think we've got a short trailer for Voices from the Gas Fields here, which is clearly a film that INEOS definitely do not want people to see. Of course, Tom Pickering, the operations director of INEOS, along with the INEOS legal counsel, came along to the recent screening in Falkirk. But what is really interesting is that they are focusing their attention on gaslands and trying to claim that gaslands is disinformation, it's incorrect. But it's very interesting that they don't mention Voices from the Gas Fields. So here's a short trailer of that film, which, in my opinion, every community across the central belt of Scotland and around the Solway Firth should be looking to screen as soon as possible.
Shale gas is part of the future, and we will make it happen.
I'm charged with, without lawful authority or excuse, obstructing the highway. Well, I believe I have lawful excuse.
We're going to take very great care that there is no damage to the water supply.
iGas at Barton Moss contaminated the well site. Then Rathlin Energy were responsible for considerable property damage as a result of their seismic testing.
There is a fishing lake which started to go down immediately following the detonation of these charges.
I think there's a huge amount of myths that are being put round in order to frighten people.
The first person that signed a well was the person that doomed us to this. An unconventional gas well isn't a pipe out of the ground. With it comes all of the drilling and the destruction. That's a hectare. Plus tracks, compressor stations, water holding ponds.
So we're right in the middle of the Australian bush here. Well, it was once bush.
We take a strip literally 520 kilometres for this one company. We sit on the Great Artesian Basin, one of the greatest water resources in the world, and they are allowed to deplete it and turn it to trash.
There used to be a beautiful green lawn with roses in it. 3 nights of rain, it was dead. Each time it rains, it just comes up black.
You're genuinely so scared of what is happening. It's untrustworthy and it's running out.
This is called a high point vent. That'll have everything in it.
The benzene, the toluene, the ethyl benzenes.
Everything.
When your nose is burning, your eyes are burning, and you got that terrible oily sort of taste, I said, you know, the flares are not, they're just venting. Then other times, it's like little fibres in your throat, you know, the flare is on.
The majority of people that have visited us, they say, how can you live there? You know.
Well, that's the film INEOS definitely do not want you to see. So if your community is anywhere in this area across the central belt of Scotland or down around the Solway Firth area and you would like to screen this film in your community, then please send either myself or Mel or Trish Buchan or Paul Young a Facebook message, or Neil McLean or anyone on the Scotland Against Fracking Facebook pages. And if you want somebody to come and handle a question and answer session, then we can find somebody within the Scottish anti-fracking community to come and give you an insight as to how this campaign is being fought. But ultimately, it needs all communities to stand up against the corporations and their puppet government, because that's exactly what it is. Jim Ratcliffe, in particular, feels that he can literally browbeat the Scottish government and indeed Westminster, and of course the unions, who he has got a current no-strike agreement with, and which I think lasts until April of next year. So the important thing is to understand what you're up against, but also understand what it is that will be unleashed upon your community if this industry ever gets a foothold. Now, Mel, in England, at the moment at least, we do have the process of the planning applications being submitted to local authorities considering those planning applications. And of course, that is the opportunity then for the community to mount its objection campaign, to study the application and to look for issues arising. Do you have that same process in Scotland?
Well, especially after what happened in Cannon Bay, goodness only knows what the process is. I mean, in Northern Ireland, they have specifically said, they have ruled that fracking is banned within their planning process. In Scotland, Nicola's announced, just like Cameron, that rather than strengthening planning rules the way Northern Ireland has against fracking, Nicola announced that she's going to streamline planning rules. So just like David Cameron, before the fracking's going to go ahead, just after an election that she hopes to win, but she says it's all about housing, of course. She doesn't mention fracking. But of course, if you streamline it for anything, for one thing, you're streamlining it for everything. And basically the word streamlining is a forked tongue speak for watering down. So goodness knows what's going to happen in Scotland, because we have them saying that the Scottish economy is now under water restrictions, but frackers aren't. They're going to streamline planning to make it easier for people to get to plan and to get what they want to do. As far as I know, Nicola's also said, can she keep the taxes from fracking? So everything Nicola's doing indicates that, like David Cameron, she is laying down the red carpet for the frackers. But unlike David Cameron, who is upfront about what he's doing, he's got a brass neck. Nicola, on the other hand, doesn't have it. She does have a brass neck, but she pretends, she likes to give the illusion that butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. But when you look at what Nicola does in Parliament, and then it's the opposite of what she says. She's a very expert manipulator of the media and of the people. And everything she said is deliberately for a headline to mislead people. But the people that are watching can see everything she does and says. I mean, she even said to the whole of Britain at the general election, I don't do deals with Tories. You can trust me. When in fact, Nicola personally lodged paperwork to allow Cameron to change our water laws, to allow the SNP and David Cameron to enter into a joint objective to create a UK market together weeks before the referendum.
So the crucial element is going to be for local community groups to literally be all over their local authorities and their local councils, their district councils, and making sure that they are monitoring what applications are or are not submitted. And also, of course, staying on top of INEOS, because, Tom Pickering recently threatened that, if Scotland doesn't permit, if the people of Scotland don't want to permit INEOS to frack the Central Belt, then they'll take their business to England. Well, I got news for you, matey. No, you won't, because we're way on top of you. And same with iGas. And, the reality is that the anti-fracking community is growing exponentially. And, we'll do everything we can through due process. But if due process is basically overridden, because, we know that 80% plus of local communities do not want this. They do not want this in their area. And in most cases, when pushed, they don't want it in any other area either. But they certainly don't want it in their home area. So we got to stay on top of it.
Well, the thing is, Nicola actually went one further on the day that she thought we would all be fooled with her headline, UCG's in the moratorium. Not only did she tell them they can start drilling, both fracking and UCG, but she also announced that if any planning applications are put in, the Scottish Parliament must be informed. Now, why would that be? Is that so that Nicola can then say, like Cameron, well, guess what? We'll make the decisions. So she's going to change planning laws, and councils aren't even allowed the independents to scrutinise and start their planning process, because Nicola said, right, once the test drilling starts, you've got to inform me if a planning application comes in. I mean, it is getting beyond it. Nicola's rule seems to be, if you're a member, you're not allowed to put forward motions and vote on it or discuss it. Nicola will decide. If you're a planning officer, you're not allowed to just accept planning applications and deal with them in the normal way. Nicola will decide. You've got to report to Nicola. Well, sorry, the world doesn't revolve around Nicola Sturgeon. The world for the rest of us revolves around our children. It revolves around the safety of our community, of the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the land we live on. And just because Nicola Sturgeon wants to poison the lot of us, it doesn't mean to say that she's going to be allowed to do it.
Well, absolutely. And, I think that I made this observation earlier. It is my observation that those people who are literally hanging on to the coattails of the SNP in the hope of getting another referendum have got a long, long wait ahead of them. It is my prediction that there will not be another independence referendum for at least a generation. The SNP know very, very well that the reason that they are in power is because they have created this hope for people. You know, we saw this with Obama, we're seeing it a bit with Jeremy Corbyn, and it's certainly the case with Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP.
Yeah,
Everything's built around hope.
I mean, she said, forget yes. I mean, we want power. So we've all to forget yes for the moment and give her power. That's what she
because she knows
said.
very well that basically once there is another referendum, and assuming that this time it isn't manipulated and that Scotland does get its independence, at that point the SNP no longer has the hook in people that it has today. Well, Mel, once again, we're out of time, and thank you so much for joining us. Just a final look at the situation on the global markets. The oil price is still hovering around about the $45 marker. Closed tonight at 46.05, way below the point at which this industry has any viability whatsoever. And the benchmark, because INEOS and Cllr are privately owned companies, so they're not listed on the stock market. But iGas, which of course is taking significant investment from INEOS, but it's an indicator of how the market sees the current state of play. And the stock price is wallowing at just over 20 pence. 21.5 was the close tonight. Of course, that is a long, long way down from the £1.60 that it was at some 21 months ago. So, you know, the game is not over by a long stretch. The moratorium of Scotland doesn't exist. Scotland is in exactly the same situation as England, and that is that the country is open for drilling. So it's time to make sure that we are recruiting, establishing new groups, and making this continue to be the fastest growing social movement this country has seen in a long, long time. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. And thanks, Mel. Great to have you on the show.